Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jerry Johnson, the current chairman of the Canaveral Council of Technical Societies. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the Simpkins Fine Arts Auditorium on the campus of Brevard Community College in Cocoa, Florida. In addition to those of us here in the auditorium, there are additional numbers joining us live via the internet at floridatoday.com and by tape delay on cable channel 5 WBCC. Tonight, in conjunction with BCC and Florida Today, the CCTS is proud to present a public discussion of the current administration's plans for space. The President is scheduled to hold discussions in Florida on April the 15th to explain his plans for America's space program. Space Coast residents are most likely to be directly impacted by the administration's intended changes. Tonight, we will provide an opportunity to hear the details from a panel of experts in two-way dialogue on key issues. In addition to the panel members, we wish to thank the President of BCC, Dr. Jim Drake, and the school's Vice President, Jim Ross, along with Mark Milowski and Bob Stouffer and Matt Reed of the Florida Today newspaper. Those leaders have joined with me, the CCTS board, in organizing this events forum. All of us here share the belief that the events that will unfold over the next several years as a result of changes proposed by President Obama's space budget deserve an informed and public dialogue. The potential impact to the local community as well as long-term impacts to our human space flight programs are too dramatic to not receive a full and open examination. That is why we are here this evening. Our society has a long history of public discussions related to the nation's space industry. CCTS has hosted over 45 annual space congresses events. Through those annual programs, the local community and the nation were informed on the latest activities associated with human spaceflight, military space programs, and commercial spacefaring endeavors. It is in that honored tradition that CCTS welcomed the opportunity to co-sponsor this evening's event. Now allow me to explain the mechanics of how we would like to conduct the discussions this evening. The BCC staff that you see in the back and will be down front shortly in the aisles will have pads and pencils they will provide to you in the audience on which you may submit written questions to the panel. Just raise your hand to get their attention and they will pass a notepad and pencil over to you. After you legibly write your questions, raise your hand and one of the staff will come and take the pad and pencil from you. Those questions will be given to our moderator who will in turn present them to the panel. If you'd like to direct your question to a specific panel member, do so by writing the panel member's name at the beginning of the question. As mentioned, the entire evening forum tonight will be recorded by BCC for later broadcast during the next week. We ask that you refrain from conversation with your neighbors during the evening's event to keep the background noise to a minimum. With that said, let me turn the program over to Matt Reed, who will introduce the panel members and moderate this evening's activities. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jerry. Well, these would be challenging times for the Space Coast, even without a recession. So our local leaders are trying to speak with a unified political voice in Washington and Tallahassee in fighting for space jobs and for money that could help develop new industry here in Brevard County. My role as a Florida Today journalist is not to rally an audience around that political message, but to question it, challenge some of our local assumptions, and elicit from our guests some good news and information that you can use to cope with the challenges ahead. Fortunately, I think our panelists are up to that challenge tonight, and I'd like to introduce them. Immediately to my right is Winston Scott, A former astronaut and director of the Florida Space Authority, he now serves as Dean of the College of Aeronautics at Florida Tech. Before retiring from NASA, he flew on space shuttle missions in 1996 and 1997. Some interesting facts. I believe I see here that he has logged 24 days, 14 hours, and 34 minutes in space. Is that correct?
Sounds right to me.
Okay, including 3 spacewalks. So that's interesting stuff. To his right is Dan Raymond. He is the business manager and officer with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local 2088. The union represents more than 800 workers involved with Kennedy Space Center and the Eastern Range here in Brevard County. And to his side is Marsh Hurd. Marsh is an aerospace consultant who serves as advisor to the Economic Development Commission of Florida's Space Coast. Mr. Hurd retired from Boeing after 35 years and now serves on several space-related boards. Gentlemen, I'd like to begin tonight by giving you each about 3 minutes to give us your take, your professional perspective from your different occupations on what the recent change in direction for the space program could mean here for the Space Coast. Winston?
Sure, thank you, and good evening. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to give a little bit of my own personal perspective on where things are proposed to go for America's space program. First of all, let me say what I understand the direction to be. The administration is proposing that we end the shuttle missions, that we also end Constellation, and that we turn over the duty of putting American astronauts in low Earth orbit to private and commercial companies. That's what I understand it in a nutshell. Now, in general, I support the commercial and private sector playing a larger role in our space business. In fact, many of you know me from my days at the Florida Space Authority, and you know that one of the things that I pushed for was just that, was enabling private and commercial space companies to come along and pick up the job of low Earth orbit, freeing NASA up to go out and do more esoteric exploration things. However, the current direction bothers me just a little bit because I do not feel that our private and commercial companies are ready for that just yet. I feel like they have a lot of development ahead of them. They have a long ways to go before they can pick up that task. So I'm very much concerned about the direction that has been proposed for us to go. Concerned from several perspectives. I'm concerned as an educator. My job right now as the Dean of the College of Aeronautics is to prepare our young people to take over the technical jobs in aviation, aerospace, engineering, and so on for the future. Well, I'm concerned that if we continue in the direction that we're going with the loss of so many jobs and therefore the loss of so much technical capability, where will be the jobs for our young people to take over? Where is the incentive to get our young people to go into science and technology? We're already seeing that there's a dearth of young people going into those fields. We're going to exacerbate that with the current direction. I could say that I have a concern as an astronaut, and yeah, maybe there's a little bit of personal concern, but really it's not. My flying days are over. You know, so it's not a personal thing with me. From a historic perspective, though, I think that we as astronauts would love to see NASA continue in that role. We'd love to see our own indigenous capability to get to space uninterrupted. So I'll leave that at that. My biggest concern is from the standpoint of an American citizen. We are currently the #1 space power in the world. And I mean power, when I say power, I mean from a knowledge standpoint. I don't mean military power. I mean, we are the leading experts in space. We explore, we learn, we are the leaders. Well, I would hate to see us relinquish that leadership, because where you stand in the world of science and technology and engineering filters down into the rest of society. And if you lead in those areas, you're going to lead in other areas. And I'd hate to see us lose that leadership role. Also, there's the issue of jobs. You know, we see numbers thrown out. I've seen anywhere from 9,000, 23,000 jobs. I hate to see that happen also. And I said I'm just about out of time on my 3 minutes, so I'll stop and pick up some of that during the rest of the discussion. But thanks for letting me be here.
Dan.
Well, it's kind of tough to follow that. But what I can say is that we have a very good and skilled workforce, not just here at KSC, but the other centers as well. And my concern for labor side is that the labor force we have now, a lot of it came from an era We were discussing earlier an era of when we had larger militaries and larger training. The universities and colleges don't have the technical capabilities to teach radar, telemetry, and some of the advanced electronics that are out there. And I'm afraid that if we lose the workforce, and I hear from them on a daily basis about some of their concerns, and I know everyone that really takes a look at the workforce is concerned about where are our jobs going to be? And if they stick it through to the end, will there be jobs for them if they're not picked up in the future? No one's under the demise or this community under the thought pattern that it's going to take as many people out there. They're worried about that demise part I was talking about. They're worried about if they don't take those open jobs when it happens. These are all things that from the labor side that we're expressing to NASA. And to the last week we had a rally, and these are the things that we're just trying to let Washington know, that our labor and our workforce is skilled, is very diverse, and the effects that we have out there right now may be some of the things that were talked about. The future programs may not, for that gap period of time, won't include them. So I'm just, and I'll kind of cut it short on this, and we'll talk about it later, is what do we do during that period of time when there is no technical work for them, but the rebuilding side? The shuttle was designed in the 60s, built in the 70s, so the analog equipment, there's a lot of time to build that 21st century launch facility that we're talking about, but will the money be there? What direction are we headed? What is it we really need? I don't think that's out there right now to know exactly what it is we're headed to and where we need to be. Maybe in the future we'll know that direction.
Marsh.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the Cape Canaveral Technical Society and Florida Today hosting us this evening. I wanted to share a couple of thoughts before we got into the question and answer period. First one is I'd like to articulate what seems to be a concern shared by a lot of people. And that is that typically when you design a major program like this one, and a lot of us in the room have had that experience, you start with what you're trying to do. And then you talk about when you're trying to do it. And when you have those things described, you can then get into the how are we going to do it. And you can then lay out a program that's got critical milestones and PDRs, CDRs, the things that we're used to dealing with. In this case, it looks like what we've done is we started with the funding profile, and then we backed into what should we do once we have those monies. In Luke, there's a great story about a fellow that sits down to build a tower, and the question is, who is going to build a tower without first considering the cost? Well, in this case, we've forgotten that we're about to build a tower. We started with the cost. And I think we need to go back and define what the tower is. And it's not too late to do that. I think the administration could gain a great deal of credibility if they came down here on, say, the 15th of April and put a stake in the ground and said, here's where we're going. And speaking personally, I don't care what they choose as a target. I don't care if they choose Mars. I don't care if they choose an asteroid. I don't care if they choose a moon of Mars. I don't care if they go back and decide to colonize the moon. But I think they need to do that and say we're going to do this on this timeline. And again, I don't care what the timing is. There are people that say that we ought to follow a flexible path. Flexible path means that we'd have a series of firsts. We'd incrementally change the way that we explore. We might go back to the moon for short periods of time. We might go from there to an asteroid. We might go from there to circumnavigating Mars or circumnavigating one of the moons. We might land robots on these surfaces. I don't really care. I think any of that would be goodness. Now, the good news is if you go through the proposed budget that the President submitted to the Congress, there is a lot of money. By anybody's standards, there's a great deal of money. And money means that you've got flexibility. I think what we're talking about is how do we connect the points? And I think there are as many ways to connect the points as there are people that have an opinion. What I suspect is going to happen is that over the next year, as the Congress does their thing, we're going to see these issues debated as we go through the authorization and appropriation cycle. And I do think it'll take the full year. The likelihood that we'll pass a budget by October the 1st, based on experience, says probably not too good. So we're probably looking at continuing resolution or an omnibus bill. So we've got about a year of this debate in front of us. And I would encourage everybody to make input to that debate mechanism. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
be here.
Mr. Pickle will be here, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm just going to count you in like we did
Okay.
with Mr. Johnson, and I'll
Your
start
timing is
at 10,
impeccable.
and then on 3 I'll be silent.
I knew he'd bring, I see, I knew he'd bring the new paper here.
Okay.
And then it's you and your address and that.
You did good.
I do too, I got it. I decided not to say it, 'cause I didn't want to have too much signatures.
We're going to come back, and I'm going to introduce you,
Okay.
and then
3 minutes?
yeah. I'll just welcome people back and give you a prompt, and away we go. Okay. Welcome back to our panel on the future of the space program here in Brevard County. I'm Matt Reed from Florida Today, and I want to introduce a fourth excellent panel member who is joining us now. Dr. Dave Weldon is a physician who served as congressman from the 15th District from 1995 to 2008. Dr. Weldon's district included Kennedy Space Center for much of that time, and he founded the House Aerospace Caucus to advocate for developing space-based businesses. Congressman, you want to give us your take on the latest change of direction for the U.S. space program?
I'd be happy to do that, Matt, and it's certainly a pleasure to be able to be here and speak about the space program. Probably the greatest pleasure that I had in representing Florida Space Coast is the work I was able to do representing the men and women who work here, particularly in our manned spaceflight program, and really to advocate for the manned spaceflight program for our nation. And it's really exciting to see the manned spaceflight program get the media attention it's getting lately. And I want to thank Barack Obama for drawing the nation's attention to it. Unfortunately, he did that essentially by, for all intents and purposes, killing the manned spaceflight program. Now, I know a lot of people were shocked and amazed to see in his budget that he was going to do away with the Constellation program, but I, for one, was not. He was interviewed during the campaign early in the phase and made a statement that he thought we shouldn't be spending so much money on the manned spaceflight program. We should spend more money on education. Now, he then, in his political rhetoric as he traveled around places like Florida, he began backing off. But I think this document came out, this was his position paper, I think in August before the election in '08. It's all about education and what he wants to do for primary education in the United States. It's all very nice, but when you get to the last page, section 10, commitment to fiscal responsibility, and he basically says the way he would pay for all of these advances in education would be to delay the Constellation program 5 years. Now, I was not happy with the Bush administration's plan to create a gap, and I criticized the Bush administration. But he was saying before he even got elected, he wanted to take that 5-year gap and make it a 10-year gap, and of course now we know he would just like to do away with the whole thing. And to say that we can't afford this when the Chinese and the Russians are doing this, and their combined economies are probably smaller than the combined economies of California, New York, and Florida. To me, this is a political problem, and as far as I'm concerned, the only way you fix it, because Nancy Pelosi is not a space supporter, Harry Reid is not a space supporter, you've got to speak at the ballot box in November. You've got to elect people who are going to support the space program. And in my opinion, if you don't get rid of Barack Obama in 2012, this is going to be an ongoing problem because he is not a space supporter. He has clearly laid out his agenda, and I think it's very bad news for us here in Central Florida. Thank you.
I should note that Congressman Weldon was a Republican congressman from District 15. Well, I want to continue on one of the topics that you brought up. One of the things that's missing from this panel tonight is a real advocate for President Obama's direction, or anybody from the White House. So for the sake of balance, I'm going to spend the next 60 seconds assuming the position here or role of Buzz Aldrin, who called the new space budget proposal of Obama's a JFK moment for him. In a February column, he wrote, quote, "The president courageously decided to direct our nation's space policy away from the foolish and unfunded moon race that has consumed NASA for more than 6 years and has boosted the agency's budget by more than $1 billion per year." Well, he's added that money. Quote, "NASA funds will go into developing and testing new revolutionary technologies that we can use in living and working on Mars and its moons." Aldrin says that because earlier Congresses failed to fully fund the Moon-Mars program, quote, "NASA virtually eliminated the technology development effort for advanced space systems. Equally as bad, NASA also raided the Earth and space science budgets in the struggle to keep the program, named Project Constellation, on track." The new vision, Aldrin points out, is known as the, quote, "flexible path," and I think, Marcia, you mentioned that. And he writes, quote, "It would redirect NASA towards developing the capability of voyaging to more distant locations in space, such as rendezvous with possibly threatening asteroids or comets, or even flying by Mars to land on its moons." A JFK moment? I'd like to get your takes on that. Winston?
I'll be glad to give you my take on that. Of course, I respect Buzz Aldrin tremendously. I know Buzz Aldrin and run into Buzz 2 or 3 times a year, and everybody knows Buzz walked on the moon. And, he's one of the legends, the giants in whose footsteps people like me got to follow. I agree with what Buzz is saying in that the issue has not been one of capability for NASA. The issue has been one of underfunding. But I don't think you fix the problem or you get us going in the right direction by shutting down what you're already doing in favor of companies or people who are trying to pick that gap up who are not ready to do it yet. I believe that the answer is that we should properly fund NASA. NASA's budget, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit, is really a pittance compared to the total national budget. I think the congressman just touched on it just a little bit. But NASA gets less than 1 penny out of every dollar we spend. I mean, it's like 0.6% or something like that. It's a very, very minute amount of money. So we could adequately fund NASA to do the things that NASA needs to do and still not even make a ripple in the total budget. So I agree with what Buzz has said. In principle, I do not agree with his assessment that the current direction is the right one. Anything that relinquishes our leadership in space, to me, is a bad move. Anything that gets rid of our indigenous capability to put our own astronauts in space is a bad move. I'm going to try to finish up here in just a second. I happen to believe that we are the strongest and best country in the world. And by that I mean we have the best transportation system in the world. We have the best communication systems in the world. Our medical technology is second to none. And the list goes on and on and on and on. We're fighting a war on terrorism, and we're winning that war because of our technology. Well, our technology is second to none because of our space program. If we relinquish our leadership in space, then slowly we begin to erode our leadership in everything else that we do in the world. And I believe that the current direction of the administration, where we get rid of our indigenous capability and all the fallout, will cause us to relinquish our leadership in space.
Dan, how do space technicians and engineers and other people that work in this industry cope with this idea of flexibility, not knowing what could be next 1 year from the next?
Well, from the perspective of the technology changes, technology's changed rapidly over the years already. But the problem is we don't know how we're going to apply the new technology to what's going on. How do you train? What do you train for? Now, there are things currently going on right now that we're trying to bring in more in the old analog part, bringing in the digital side of the house. And we're actually planning on and trying to bring in digital training systems. How we're planning for tomorrow is just a matter of training with what technology is right now, hoping the research that may come out may add to it. Right now, I don't think there's the technology available to get to where we'd like to be, and that research, again, has to be fully funded in order for us to figure it out. So really and truly, the technicians kind of go with the flow and the guidance, and without guidance, it's kind of just wandering around and where we're really headed for. Give us some guidance so we know what to train to. Give us some direction. We know we have a very skilled and very dedicated workforce. You can't take that out. And they will, that's exactly right. They will be here even when they don't have the support. They are here to support what's going on right now, and they'll be here tomorrow. So give us that direction, and we'll prove that we can do that job.
Marsh, have you heard about any of these revolutionary technologies? And what are the opportunities for us? Are there any opportunities in this here to develop new industries? I mean,
Sure. There are two or three that just come immediately to mind. If you could put a filling station in low Earth orbit and send up a vehicle that was only partially fueled and then fuel it once you got to orbit, you can double the throw weight that you then take to an asteroid or to a planet. So there's a technology, incidentally, that's ideally suited for Kennedy Space Center. Nobody in the world knows more about cryogenics than we do. So we would be almost the perfect person to do that, to develop this on-orbit fueling station. Second one that comes rapidly to mind, the radiation environment is really harsh once you get outside the Earth's protection. And it's not just the atmosphere, but we're protected because we've got a magnetic field around the Earth. Once you get outside of that, you're in deep space with very, very harsh radiation. To go from here to Mars today takes 210 days if you choose the most optimum trajectory. So for 210 days, you have to protect a crew. If we developed an ion propulsion system, you can make that same trip in 40 days. So the difference in the radiation absorption is just breathtaking. That makes the radiation shielding problem considerably easier. So there's another example of a technology that needs to be developed in the near future. And there are others. I'll give you a third one. There's a Latin term called in situ resource utilization, which some of you are familiar with. Basically, it means living off the land. When you go from here to Mars, you go on a one-way trip. When you get there, you have to mine the elements that you find on the surface. You have to convert those into fuel and oxidizer, or you don't come home. So there's a technology that has to be developed to allow you to do that. That technology is going to take some time. You probably don't want to try it for the first time by going to Mars. You might want to try it on the moon, because if you mess up, we can bring you home in 2 days. But there are three technologies just off the top of my head that I think are coming. And I think that they can be accommodated in this vision that the Obama administration has offered. But I think that's only the technology side. I agree with all the other shortcomings that we've talked about.
Congressman, even if there is more money in the NASA budget, from a congressional point of view, how likely is it that that money is going to be put to the uses that is envisioned in this budget proposal? And how does a congressional oversight panel, for example, consider a plan like this where there's a lot of spending going on, maybe not necessarily a clear vision of what it's being spent for?
Well, the situation in Congress right now for NASA, in my opinion, is very precarious. If you look back historically at what happened in the past, there were always key people in key positions on key committees that were NASA supporters. And most people in this community do not know the fact that Tom DeLay was actually one of the people who was constantly fighting for NASA for many years. He represented the section that included Johnson Space Flight Center, and he was the majority whip for many years, and he was the majority leader. The current situation right now is very grim. If you look across the board, Nancy Pelosi voted to kill the space station. She was never a space supporter. The man who is the chairman of the Appropriations, and by the way, for many years, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee was a gentleman from Texas who was a big space supporter. The current chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House is a fellow by the name of David Obey, who has repeatedly introduced amendments to the appropriations process himself to cut NASA. And the Senate is not much better. And this is why I say, and it's not just my partisan sentiments, obviously as a Republican, I would love to see Nancy Pelosi go, and I would love to see Harry Reid go, but there's a bigger issue here for us, I believe, on the Space Coast. And the way these bills get introduced and the parliamentary process is very, very complex, and people like Pelosi and the chairman, if they don't want these things to go through and the president is opposing it, it's going to be very, very hard to get more money into the program. That's why I think this should really become part of the political debate, because that's what elections should be about, in my opinion, and the direction people want to go on key programs. And to say you don't have the money doesn't cut it. They increased the EPA 91% in their emergency spending bill that they put through last year. It was in excess of $12 billion. Was the air that dirty? Was the water that dirty? They increased it by 91% over 2 years. So as far as I'm concerned, this is not an issue of the money not being there. This is purely an issue of political willpower.
I'd like to jump back in if I could.
Absolutely.
We have a point we can jump in?
Yo, by all means.
I like all of the comments that we're saying. I certainly support them, but I want to pick on something Marsh said. Marsh was talking about the new technologies that need to be developed. And the thing that bothers me about the current direction, the current plan, is that there is no clear-cut path by which NASA or anyone else would take to develop these technologies. It's not even spelled out in there. Not only that, but we are getting to a point where we are not allowing our engineers and scientists access to their laboratory. There's only so much you can do on the ground. But when you're a space scientist or space researcher, whatever, your laboratory is up there. But we're essentially grounding our own personnel, but charging them with going off and developing these new technologies. It makes no sense. And I hope I'm articulating this very clearly. But suppose you tell me, Winston, you're a scientist. I want you to go off and research something. But by the way, I'm not going to let you go to your laboratory. You have to work only at your house. That doesn't make any sense. But that is analogous to the direction that I think we're going. So if we don't have a capability to get to space, which is our laboratory, then we're not likely to develop the technologies that Marsh just talked about.
Well, that brings me to the issue of privatization and relying more on corporate interests to develop our new technology. And in a recent opinion piece in Florida Today, former astronaut and KSC director Robert Crippen wrote, quote, "Planning to use commercial capability as the only means to launch our crews is foolish. We'd be extremely lucky to develop that within a decade." And my question is about the timing. Why do we think it will take that long? And why are we so pessimistic about private contractors' ability to carry out the mission? Looking back, private contractors helped develop and carry out the Apollo missions. They have basically managed and run the shuttle program. They handle the Air Force's rocket programs and some of our most complex scientific missions. So why is there so much skepticism about the same people, same engineers, same companies being able to launch cargo and passengers to the International Space Station? Congressman.
I supported the initiative to develop commercial capability to put cargo in orbit. And some of the companies were coming to us when I was still in Congress with ideas and plans and proposals to take their technologies that next step further for manned flight. The essential problem is it's extremely expensive to take these systems and convert them over to the capability of maintaining man in orbit, men and women in orbit. And to furthermore take those technologies the next step further and to start doing useful things in orbit, like going to the moon or going onto Mars, it's such an astronomical leap that it's perceived by a lot of people as a cop-out, a way of saying, you know, it's sort of like throwing a bone to the free market conservatives. Oh, we will let the private sector do this because we don't have the money to do it through the government way. And unless you put a lot of money on the table for these private companies to do it, as far as I'm concerned, it's not going to happen. And if you're going to be putting a lot of money on the table, you're really not going to save the money that you claim that you're going to save. And I think Bob Crippen is being conservative to say this is a 10-year project. I mean, it could actually be much longer to get these private companies to do that. The other thing, I don't want to monopolize the time here, is the administration put this out without a clear vision of how they were going to get these private companies to develop these human-rated rockets. They did not have a clear vision of what the funding stream would look like so that these private contractors could maybe possibly step forward and say, we're going to do that. It was sort of, the way it was presented was pie in the sky. That, oh, we're just going to get out of this business and we're going to let the private contractors do it. And that's why it makes people like me very suspicious. They want to kill it, basically. They've never been supporters of it. They want to divert the money to education or other social programs.
Marsh, in an article in Sunday's editions of Florida Today, we asked you if there was enough of a market for commercial crew transportation business and for cargo. And you said that there's probably not enough of a market for transporting U.S. astronauts alone for these private companies, but probably a market for launching both cargo and astronauts. And you added, quote, by the time we consider crew and cargo supply missions to privately operated orbiting stations, such as Bigelow's Genesis family of space modules, the business model is readily validated. Explain that to me. What does that mean?
Sure. Somebody has to drive a stake in the ground and say, here's the market. What happens to the market projection, though, is each year it picks up itself and it moves 1 year to the right because it never quite materializes as the way that it was envisioned this year. But if you take one of those models, and there are plenty of them out there, they're widely available, if you look at the market for low Earth orbit resupply for cargo, it is a substantial market. NASA alone has a requirement measured in billions of dollars, so there's a cargo component to the International Space Station. Then NASA has a requirement to put astronauts up. And I would point out that the Russians have doubled the price now for a trip to the station since we've sort of backed off. So there's a market there to carry people back and forth. Then when you add in the purely commercial operators who aren't there yet, but who are coming, okay? Then you begin to see that there's a cargo and crew requirement to go to other orbiting stations, not just to the International Space Station. At issue is how much do you believe those markets? If you accept the market that they're using today for their projections, and that's a big if, but if you accept that, then indeed when you combine all these things, you can make the business case close.
What are the other orbiting stations?
Bigelow is the nearest one that's coming to, but there are others that are being developed now, not in the open, but there are entrepreneurs that have ideas for how they would do this.
Interesting. Dan, let's talk about workers for a minute here. In a globalized economy, where will space workers, including electricians and others, where will they go if we see the decline of jobs here? Question, are other countries' space programs recruiting our workforce?
Well, I can say part of the answer is yes. The we're not really getting recruiting from other countries per se, but we're getting our technologies being sent overseas to other locations and or offshore or other platforms that they tried launching at sea and other things that's going on. We will see, or could see, our people going into other. Electronics are a very diverse background. They can fit in almost any economy. They can fit in almost any marketplace. So some of the skills that we have could fit into multiple locations. And unfortunately, some of the truth of the matter is some of the commercial launches that we see coming up in the future won't pay what the jobs pay today. Some of the things that are out there right now that are being talked about or being offered won't keep you at the same standard of life that you have right now. So to stick around for jobs that may be $10 an hour less, if you're going to look at it in that aspect, are going to start driving people to look into other industries. And it might be overseas. It might be in other areas along those lines. But the bottom line is they have to survive. And when it comes to the money, they have to go wherever the market will pay what they can need to survive with their families.
Winston, the congressman talked about in Congress, there are people from other regions who really don't care about space. They're ready to take the money and go spend it on education or some other topic. But you were a leader in the state's organization for promoting space. Do you find the same thing here in Florida, that other parts of Florida aren't behind this effort to try to secure and develop jobs?
In my experience, and this is going back 3 years now as director of the Space Authority, I found that there was more interest in space here in Brevard County than there was in, say, Dade County or up in Leon County. I suspect that probably has changed. I believe, and I don't know that for sure, the congressman can probably answer better than I can, that probably the entire state is a bit more galvanized behind the space movement than it was 3 or 4 years ago. I believe, though, that if the American people understood the benefits that everyone received from space, everyone would stand up and support it a bit more. People naively think that space costs a lot and I don't get anything from it. Yet they go through life all day, every day, reaping the benefits of space, and they just don't know it. And we, whoever we is, probably haven't done a good job of letting them know what they get from it. And if you give me a few more seconds, I'll give you an example. I was watching the local news just before coming here tonight. There was an article on the news about an individual who had used X-ray technology over the years to check for cracks in solid rocket fuel. But now that technology is being used to detect breast cancer cells in women. It's been used for medical purposes. Well, that's not a regional benefit. That's a benefit that helps everybody worldwide. But people worldwide don't understand where that technology is coming from. And I think one of the things we need to do is, as best we can, get people to understand just what the significant payoff is from our space program. Perhaps we get more universal support for it.
Okay.
Well, right.
I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit to the issue of the space shuttle. Representative Suzanne Cosmas, who represents the Kennedy Space Center now in northern Brevard, and Congressman Bill Posey, who represents southern part of Brevard, are calling for an extension of the shuttle fleet and more flights in order to save jobs and buffer the economy, but also for some reasons that you brought up earlier. Congressman, do they stand a chance? What do you expect from that process now that you've had a chance to stand back and think about how that works?
Well, as I said earlier, I was critical of the Bush administration's decision to retire the shuttle in 2010 and not begin new flights of Constellation, of Orion until 2015, and then it got pushed to 2016. And I actually introduced a bill to extend shuttle operations, and Tom Feeney, who held Susan Cosmos' seat, was my co-sponsor. And of course, this really boils down to dollars, and we've talked about that earlier. And I do want to say something about the dollar issue, which I think is a broader issue, and I think it's a significant issue, because I honestly believe that in many ways our manned spaceflight program is like the canary in the coal mine. and that what's going on right now has the potential to impact NIH and CDC, and that is we have runaway entitlement spending in this country, and NASA is not 0.6% of federal spending, it's 0.6% of discretionary spending. Total federal spending, NASA is like 0.2% of 1%. And you know, one of the things that I worked on, and we were really never successful at doing it, is reforming all these programs. And the reason you have a sea of red ink in Washington right now is not just because of the recession and not just because of the increased spending that Congress is engaged in, but as well just the explosive growth of all these programs. So to answer your question, to find the money to keep the shuttle flying for the next 2 or 3 years and develop the Constellation program, now that the President of the United States says he doesn't want to see it in his budget, that's a real heavy lift, no pun intended. And what you really need to have happen, it's a crisis of willpower, not only to make the commitment that we are dedicated as a nation to continuing to try to lead the world in science and technology through manned space exploration, but we're also dedicated to the principle of fiscal prudence and fiscal sanity, and we're going to try to clean up the mess that currently exists in Washington, D.C. Because I honestly believe a lot of this is coming back around to bite, and I'm convinced it's not going to stop with the manned spaceflight program. It's going to start affecting a host of areas, National Science Foundation, as the red ink, the sea of red ink gets wider and deeper, it's going to affect our whole seed corn of research and development all across our economy.
I want to follow up on that.
Absolutely.
I learned a long time ago that when there's an emotional debate, the best way to change the debate is to throw a fact into the pool. I would offer a couple of facts that the public should be aware of. You do not casually extend the shuttle operation. If you look at a shuttle, it's comprised basically of 3 things. It's got a set of solid rocket boosters. They're no trouble. ATK builds those all the time. They've got storehouses full of them. That's not a big issue at all. The orbiter itself, there are 3 of them. They're in pretty good shape. You probably need to go back and certify them if you're going to extend their useful life, and that's a paper audit that could be done. The real problem is that the external tank, that huge fuel tank that you see on the side of the vehicle, we have very few of those left. Depending on how you count, they're either 2 or 3 because they exist in different states of configuration. If you were to restart that line, you would have to restart the supply chain, and that supply chain has essentially been abandoned. There really is not the infrastructure it takes to build that tank. So from a practical standpoint, you've got 4 vehicles left. You have 2 or 3 tanks that you could press into service. So you could have a total of 7 before you would have to go back and spend billions of dollars to reconstitute the supply line. The issue would be, what would you do with those 7 if you were king for a day? You could either fire the 4 on schedule and we'll be done within a year, or you could add 1 or 2 and extend over perhaps another year. The best you could do would be to build up all of them and fly 2 a year, and that would buy you a total of 3 years. Okay?
Let me just comment to what Marsh said. I'm well aware of the supply chain issue, and that is why in 2007 I was trying to move forward an initiative to continue shuttle operation beyond 2010, because that was actually one of the things I was trying to accomplish, was to keep the supply chain going. And I was literally having conversations with people in Michoud as they were planning on cutting things up. And so the gentleman is correct. If you wanted to really extend shuttle a long period of time, it would take a tremendous amount of money. Now, to do what he just described would probably prevent, my guess, a lot of people from being laid off in this county, and would prevent some of the embarrassment of us having to rely on the Russians to put our astronauts to the space station. But even in a best case scenario where you reverse the Obama plan, you put Orion back on track, you extend shuttle slightly longer, we still have problems now at this point in time.
I want to ask a question about, even if we have the parts for the shuttle, is it the right thing to do? And a couple of points of conversation. Back in January, the Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel issued what is an annual report. It has become one since the Columbia tragedy. And it said that, it warns that the risk of continuing to fly the shuttle without a recertification and expending resources to bring it up to modern standards is more than we should ask astronauts to shoulder. It warns that the shuttle is a complex machine by its inherent design, and risk is increasing due to aging, wear, and the lack of engineering support from second and third tier suppliers. And it also says that the risks must be communicated clearly to Congress and the public, and to do otherwise is disingenuous and does the nation a disservice. Keep that in mind, because I also got this question that doesn't from a member of our audience who asked, how can the shuttle be deemed unsafe for those extra flights, but be safe for these final 4 flights? What do you make of that, Winston?
Well, I certainly agree. The reader's question there asked the common sense question. What we do with the shuttle is the same thing we do with any other vehicle, be it a bicycle, a car, a motorcycle, a boat, or whatever, is that we manage the risk. Whenever you get on your car in the morning, you manage the risk. You put your seatbelt on, you lock your doors, you don't text while you're driving, you don't eat a hamburger and drink fries eat fries while you drive. You manage the risk, and the space shuttle is the same way. We manage the risk. Even though the shuttles are old and they're complex vehicles, I believe that the shuttles can be operated with an acceptable degree of risk. And here's where the common sense comes in. We're doing it. We just landed one 2 weeks ago. We're getting ready to launch another one 3 weeks from now. We're going to launch 3 after that. We obviously are managing the program with an acceptable degree of risk. There's no reason why we could not continue to do so while we pursue a replacement vehicle. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Let me point something else out to you. You talked about the report there, and the caveat, remember, it's written in the report, is recertification. That's what Marsh just said. So absolutely, in my opinion, we should recertify the shuttles. We should keep them flying until we develop a replacement. And by recertifying, we manage the risk.
Dan, your folks, the people that are in the workforce, are the people that are actually down in the guts of this flying machine. What do you hear in terms of the condition of that spacecraft?
They're ready to fly, from what most of them are saying. There are definitely problems every time they come back, but that's why they do the tests that they do. That's why they're trained in the different aspects that they are, whether it be from the tiles to doors, to systems, to electronics, to optics. It's all tested from time to time, and from what the reports that we're hearing is that they are in fact aging, but they're aging acceptably. And it is something that would be, this is not my forte, I rely on, but what I can say is from what I'm hearing is that they're saying let's fly them.
Okay, I want to play devil's advocate here because the congressman talked about the embarrassment of having the Russians launch our astronauts to the International Space Station. The International Space Station is not only the most incredible engineering accomplishment in human history, it's also one of the greatest accomplishments in peace and international cooperation. Why are we going back to the sudden suspicion of the Russians and talk of supremacy and that kind of a thing? What are we afraid of?
Vladimir Putin. Well, we did launch our astronauts on the Russian rockets after Columbia. And the plan, when you think back of bringing them on board and making them a critical partner, which was actually something that was developed many years ago, it created a lot of problems because the Russians delayed the delivery of a lot of their hardware, and it cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. But after Columbia, we were certainly glad to have them. I think the real issue here is not so much the embarrassment of an American having to get on a Soyuz, because we've done that. We did that after Columbia. And I've seen their hardware. I've been to their manufacturing facility. I've met their cosmonauts. They're really very much like our people. They're really pioneers. They're explorers. The real issue is, why can't we continue to fly our system? And when you really probe and push, the people say we can't afford it. And to me, that doesn't cut it. It's really, the correct answer is, I don't want to afford it. I want to spend money on something else. So I want to put our astronauts on a Russian rocket because I don't want to afford to keep our space shuttle program. Now, yes, at this point in time, recertification and all these other things and not having a supply chain, they're really big issues. But this really goes back to the original presentation made by Bush at NASA headquarters. And the weak link in that, in my opinion, was to say we're going to retire the shuttle in 2010 and not fly our new system until 2015. And this is sort of the worst case scenario coming about now. You get a new administration who doesn't like the new rocket, and boom, we're grounded. And we live on the Space Coast, and we've got thousands of unemployed space workers.
One of the things that I hear, a phrase that I hear a lot lately is man-rated or human-rated as a different category of spacecraft, one that's safe to fly, for people to fly on. And I'd like to hear from any of you. Is there something mutually exclusive based on our experience with costs between affordability and profitability for a private company and anything human-rated? It seems like anything human-rated, the potential for cost overruns it's exponential. But I'm not an expert. Your take.
Well, it's not so much cost overruns, it's just that, and we in the United States require a certain degree of safety in any vehicles or systems with which we allow people to partake. You know, again, bicycle, automobile, train, plane, or whatever. We require that, and rightly so. Well, it's an order of magnitude more expensive to engineer a vehicle to the degree of safety that we would like than it would be to build a vehicle that's not going to take people. Kind of, that's the simplistic approach to it, but there is a great difference in price.
Are those costs, I'd like to know how our costs compare to the rest of the world when it comes to launching things to the International Space Station or any other kind of a commercial. Marsh, you probably have a pretty good take on that since you're involved with trying to...
I can try, but I will tell you the problem is really arcane. It's the accounting system that you choose to use. You can collect cost any way that you choose to collect cost. It depends on whether you're selling or buying. Okay? I would truly point out 2 or 3 things. One, we use 2 Soviet vehicles right now. We use Soyuz, as the Congressman mentioned, for carrying people back and forth. We use Progress for hardware. We had a contract with the Russians through the end of last year. We extended it, and they doubled the price for both. Okay, now I don't think that's an accounting problem. I doubt seriously that their marginal costs have changed dramatically over the year. They're free market capitalists, just like we are. So are the Chinese. I had the opportunity to help the Chinese with part of their aerospace industry a few years ago. I gave them a part and asked them to build it, and they did. They gave it to me, and it was fine. And I said, how much do you charge for this? And the answer was, how much will you pay for it? Because they lacked an accounting system that allowed them to collect the cost the way that we collect our cost. So it's a market that's price-driven at this point, and it's not based on the true science of accounting. Certainly they will keep book to the point where they know they're profitable, but after that, they'll charge what the market will bear.
Okay.
But going back to your question, if you leave out the international market and strictly look at what NASA does versus a private commercial space company, there's an order of magnitude difference between just building a rocket that will fly someplace and building a rocket that's going to take people someplace. And if I'm going to pay this private company to ensure the degree of safety that I want NASA to ensure, I'm not sure you're going to save the equivalent amount of money, if you follow what I'm getting at.
I get it.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I just add a little bit to this discussion of man rating? When you're going to put men in orbit, you have to bring water, you have to bring food, you have to bring waste disposal systems, you have to bring air, you have to bring carbon dioxide scrubbers. It is a whole nother critter, and it gets real expensive, and it gets very, very complicated. You also have to have higher levels of redundancy, so you're adding systems that can't fail. You can't have a carbon dioxide scrubbing system that can fail. So it's got to have all these redundancies on it, and it just gets prohibitively expensive, and that's part of the reason the costs are so much higher, and part of the reason why a lot of people are seriously questioning whether the commercial companies will be able to step up and actually do this significantly less than what NASA does it for. I mean, they may be able to do it somewhat less, but I find it very hard to believe that they could do it an order of magnitude less. It's just too complicated. But I think we can do it. I think we can do it if we put our minds to it and our hearts to it.
I would like to go to a reader question here. We're getting to the point where we probably should mine some of these and give you a chance to respond to them. You know, we have a SpaceX rocket out there about to take a test flight, and this question is from readers, says, or from an audience member, can you see a future use of the KSC launch complex as a true commercial spaceport in the future? Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll
Okay.
jump on it. Absolutely, yes. I think it's possible. I think, again, when I go back to my days at the Space Authority, one of the things I was pushing for is the use of the facilities at KSC and Cape Canaveral for commercial space launches. So yes, it's possible. The infrastructure is there. I think some things are going to have to change if it's going to become economically feasible to get the private and commercial companies in here launching on a large scale. Currently, with the government regulations and the security procedures and all the procedures that govern the use of that range and those pads, it's going to have to be loosened. They're currently geared for government operations, either military or NASA. And if you're going to bring the commercial and private sector in, the rules need to change. And we're not there yet. So the answer is yes, it's possible, but it's not an easy do, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, which leads me to a second point. Some people seem to think that if we build it, we will come. You know, we've got all this money, and we're going to refurbish the KSC facilities, and all the commercial people are going to flock here because the laws of physics dictate it. No, the laws of economics sometimes overrule the laws of physics, and the commercial companies are going to go where they can launch the cheapest. There is no guarantee that commercial and private launches will have to be done here at KSC, and that's something we in Brevard County need to wake up and see. It's very possible those launches will go someplace else.
I've begun to see letters to the editor and even some campaign mail pointing fingers at local incumbents for not doing enough over the years to prepare us for this economic shock. Was there something else that we could have done in addition to the roundtables, the lobbying for economic development, that kind of thing? And what else can we still do to help soften this blow? Anyone? Marsh?
Well, I'd suggest that we've made great strides. Shortly after the Bush administration dropped their vision for space exploration in 2004, there was a groundswell in the county and in the state to figure out what that meant going forward. So the Economic Development Commission, the Brevard Workforce Board, both were well up to speed with what was going on, as was the congressional delegation. I mean, we got great support out of Congressman Weldon, out of Congressman Feeney. That support has continued with Congressman Posey and Congressman Cosmas. I mean, they are doing an absolutely first-class job. The problem is that if you look at the U.S. Congress with 636 members or whatever it is, We represent a delegation of 25 or 27, depending on whether or not you include the Senate, and we're not cohesive. So when we get to Washington, the question is, how do you influence that body politic when you've only got a handful of advocates? When we add the spacefaring states into it, it gets better, but we're still nowhere near the point where we can actually influence the body, the heart, the whole body in a serious way. I give kudos to everybody that's gone to Tallahassee and to Washington and brought money home. You may not be aware of it, but there are several millions of dollars that have come to the county in the last 2 years just on the workforce-related issue. You now have a bus that circulates out at the Kennedy Center that has people coming on board, helping them with career preparation. We have classes being run. There's virtual training available. So, I mean, we've done a great deal, but I hate to say this, it turns out it only matters about two things. One is politics and the other one's money. The action for the next year is in Washington, D.C. And we have got to be heard in D.C. if we're going to make any headway at all.
Dan, I saw you nodding your head there. Do you want to add
Well,
your perspective?
that is exactly right. We have got to get Washington's attention to know that it's not a matter of canceling programs, or it is a matter of canceling programs. It's a matter of continuing the right thing, and that is that direction that we don't have right now. It goes right back to that direction. It goes back to the funding. It goes back to what we need to do. But his comment about of getting Washington's attention that this is an important issue, again, not just to Brevard County, but this is a global issue, but it's definitely a national issue. And we have to take it serious enough. You don't take an action, you don't speak up, you don't write your congressman, you don't do what you need to do, then you kind of get what you deserve. And I think we should all of us, speak loudly and say that this is an important issue for our nation and for our families. That's what I think.
Winston, can you describe, this is a question from our audience, can you describe the space program in China versus the United States?
I know, not real well, and no, to be quite honest, not real well. I kind of know the space program in China in general. Probably Marsh is a better guy to do that one for me if I can toss the ball over to him.
By all means, toss.
You can try. I wish Tom Feeney were here because Tom really does understand the Chinese. I understand them to a certain extent. They do not have the same kind of a civil organization as we do. Their military tends to hold sway. For this point in their development process, that's probably not unusual. I mean, we started with the ICBM world and then transitioned to the civil space world, so that's probably not uncommon. I've had a lot of experience with the Chinese over the years, and I must tell you that because they're used to operating in a central planning economy, they can do whatever they decide they want to do. If they're serious about bringing electricity to rural China, they'll go out and put the Three Gorges Dam project in being. And it cost them billions of dollars. They relocated millions of people to do it. So it's not an issue of willpower with them. If they target space, then they will be successful in space. And there's just not a doubt in my mind that'll be the case. They do not enter into things that they don't expect to succeed at. So if they decide they want to be a spacefaring nation, they will be. If they decide they want to be in low Earth orbit, they will be. If they decide they want to be in the exploration business, they will do that. The question is, in my humble opinion, we've said it 3 or 4 different ways, and I'll try again. We are the world's leader in human space flight and exploration. Do you want to see that go the way of shipbuilding and steel and consumer electronics? You know, even to some extent, commercial airplanes. I mean, Airbus is a factor now, and they were not 20 years ago. So it's a matter of willpower. It's not really an issue of cost. It's do we have the willpower to maintain this position of supremacy?
You know, I'm reminded of the story of the Chinese fleet, and it's often told in space circles, and I fully expected to see it appear in all the columns that were being written about the demise of our manned spaceflight program. under the Obama plan. And sure enough, there it was. And it's a fascinating story. The Chinese, and I think this was in the 1500s, had the most sophisticated navy and the biggest ships and the largest navy, and they were reaching out all across the globe. And their leadership decided to just shut it down, and they went into a technological decline. The West began using their technologies, and then, of course, the shock of all shocks, steamships came up the Yangtze River 300 years later. They were colonized, and they were humiliated. And the parallels are being drawn to today, that we are going to shut down our manned spaceflight program while they, in turn, are ramping up theirs. And what will be the consequences 50 and 100 years from now? And this is why, and that was, when you read about that whole story in Chinese history, it was a deliberate intellectual decision of the Chinese leaders to shut down their navy. They saw it as being not needed or irrelevant. They saw other things as more important that had an astronomical impact on the future of their country, their national pride. And the parallels to today, in my opinion, are eerie and scary. And you made the comment earlier about campaigns and campaign literature and accusations and finger pointing. Yes, the political process can be very unpleasant to watch, but in my opinion, it's necessary. It's kind of like a family argument. Where are we going to go to dinner? And you got to have these debates, and I think this is a debate we can win. The American people love the space program. Every time that shuttle goes off, every local TV station all over the fruited plain has it on their evening news. They love the space program, and to see it go away, to see the high ground of space being ceded to these countries that really have an economy and a technological sophistication a fraction of what ours is, I think that has to be debated and discussed. And I think it's a debate that we can win, that we can come out ahead on, and that the people will get behind more money for the space program and keeping our astronauts flying on U.S. rockets.
It's interesting how things come to your mind after you hear people talk. I had the pleasure of hosting Colonel Young Li Wei, who was the first Chinese taikonaut, to a reception here 4 or 5 years ago. And in preparation for his visit, we asked him if he would mind giving us a presentation on his mission. And of course, his mission was only 2 or 3 times around the Earth. But we wanted to do that partly to honor him and to give him the respect that we thought he deserved as a fellow space traveler. Well, when he and his delegation arrived, what they gave us was really a lot of fluff. And it was very clear that his delegation and therefore their philosophy in China was very militaristic, as Marsh pointed out. As such, though, they put the resources necessary to get done what they want to get done, and they accomplish it. The Chinese graduate thousands and thousands of engineers every year, and we in the United States are having a lot of difficulty getting our young people to go into engineering and science and technology. The Chinese have pledged to be on the moon, and I think the date is 2015. I'm not sure if that's correct or not. And if they keep going the way they're going to get there. I just read yesterday, well, the Chinese have selected their first female taikonauts. So I would echo the Congressman saying and what Mr. Hergel just said. They're serious. And when they set their mind to do something, they're going to do it. And the question is whether or not when we get to some point where we can look back and see how this race has transpired, are we the U.S. out front, or are we left in the dust someplace? And that's where my concern lies.
Well, I want to tackle that issue of supremacy a little bit. I think that's something that a lot of people can really agree on. I think Americans really want to be the #1 in space. But when you look at our options here, the space shuttle, why do we want the space shuttle? Because we can launch people to the International Space Station. Well, there's lots of people up at the International Space Station. the space shuttle can carry heavy stuff. Well, the European Space Agency launched a capsule that was as big as a London double-decker bus. The Japanese launched a capsule that carried 3.5 tons worth of stuff up there. It almost seems like the world is caught up to us when it comes to being at the International Space Station, carrying heavy stuff up there. Going to the moon might have been it, but here we were running into these magnitudes of order where we didn't know what we could do. Isn't it possible that the potential to leapfrog the world with new technology really is in that flexible path? Are there those game-changing technologies that we cannot develop now because so much of our space program is going into continuing doing what all the rest of the world is doing now?
And not to monopolize, but I mean, you're absolutely right. And we do want to make those new technological advances. But in my opinion, you don't shut down what you're doing with the intent of moving forward. That makes no sense to me. How can you progress if you stop what you're doing? If I'm a basketball coach, I'm not going to pull my team out of the league for a year with the idea that the following year I'm going to come in and beat everybody. That makes no sense whatsoever. You've got to stay in the game in order to make the advances that you want to make.
And along those lines, there's no reason that the commercial ventures, or if you stay in that game, can't mentor from our program that currently exists, and you continue and you actually create more jobs, more knowledge, more base, and still continue with that leadership role that we currently exist in. I mean, there is plenty of room for coexistence between a valid manned space, U.S.-made space program and commercial industry. There's no reason they both can't coexist, and we train and bring up those and mentor those and not have the problems, and not picking, but not having, you're going to have things like happen today with a shutdown of a premature engine shutdown. That's part of the space program. You can't just say, I'm going to do this and have it done today. You never know. There aren't the monies for it. Commercial industry is not going to try to explore. There's no money in exploration. They can't make money on that unless there's something out there, a goal for them to reach. If there was a gold moon and they could go get that, there's a goal for them to go get. But there isn't nothing like that out there right now. So we just need to commingle what we've currently got, keep an existing program, keep a strong space program, and bring up and nurture this potential for existence. And drop some of the red tape. Allow those commercial industries to come in without having the red tape that's currently out there that keeps them from being a feasible program. And it's pretty straightforward, really. It's just common sense.
The commercial side of things, I mentioned earlier, we have SpaceX that's got this test rocket out there. It seems promising. At least it's a rocket that's out there. Politically, does it have a chance? If that rocket doesn't succeed, given the political climate today on the Space Coast, are people going to look at what could be otherwise a routine failure and say, you see, we can't do it with the private sector?
That's why if they coexist, they can do it. They can have the failures, but you can continue on the supremacy of the leadership that we have and do both. If you have a failure, you have a failure. You look back at the history of what happened with the other rockets before. Time after time after time, launch and failure, launch and failure. That's where we got to where we're at today. Don't give away what we've already gotten. Keep what we've got and add to it with a new program.
Does anybody wanted to jump on that? I think because I have a question from the audience here. The question is this, inspirational question. What noble endeavor can we encourage our young people to participate in that has the same scale and presents the same challenge and offers the same peacetime benefits that their parents in Brevard County had, or that their parents in Brevard County can be retrained to support? Is there another big one out there that both our young people can be brought up to be inspired by and that their parents can be retrained to support?
You know, it's always, I think, dangerous to try to relive the past and the glory days of Apollo and the moon race. I don't believe will ever quite happen the same way again, because the past is the past and you have to move on to the future. Now, one of the most amazing comments that I ever heard from one of the Apollo astronauts was that he said, when I came back from the moon, I thought we were going to be landing on Mars within 10 years. And he said to think, and at the time he said that to me, it's Gene Cernan, and this was about 10 years ago, to think 30, 40 years later, we don't even have a plan to go to Mars. Now, I'm all for trying to develop new technologies, but NASA has been working on ion propulsion technologies for 20 years, okay? And I'm actually all for spending more money on those technologies, particularly if it has the potential to shorten the time, which can dramatically shorten the cost or reduce the cost. But I don't see it as sincere or genuine the way this is being played out. The way it looks to me is a con, basically, that we're going to shut down your man-rated rocket. Oh, but we're going to spend all this more money on technologies, and we're going to do all these other things. And Winston said it very well. NASA has to have a place to go. It has to have a mission, particularly the manned spaceflight program. And if you're not going somewhere, you're going nowhere. And you can talk all you want about developing new technologies, but if you don't have a vision, without a vision, the people will perish. You have to have a place to go. A destination is what NASA needs. I thought the plan, well, I criticized the Bush administration's gap in service. The plan of going back to the moon and onto Mars sounded like a reasonable one, partially because of something what Marsh just talked about earlier. You know, using in situ resources. You know, the moon we now know is loaded with water, and people say you can go to Mars more cheaply and more quickly if you fuel up on the moon. So I think there's a lot of potential in what the Bush plan said. And frankly, I think part of the problem of what we're dealing with today is it was the Bush plan. And there's a certain amount of hubris that, oh, that was a bad plan, so we want to get rid of it, and we want to come up with a new one. But they don't really have a new one.
Yeah, I can echo one part of that. You know, all politics aside, at least we had a plan. Bush said, building an actual space station. That's pretty clear to me. Go to the moon. That's pretty clear to me. Go to Mars. That's pretty clear to me. But where we stand right now, we don't have anything. We're not going anyplace. So in this particular case, any plan was better than no plan.
Do you think we ought... We are approaching the end of the show, and you guys keep answering the questions that I'm reading as we go along. But do you think that we undersold, that NASA undersold the potential for Constellation to go beyond the moon and onto Mars eventually?
Well, I don't think, and you're looking at me, so I'll answer. I don't think the issue was NASA or NASA selling under or whatever. The issue is what Congressman Weldon said. It's one of political will. It's not about dollars. It's not about NASA. It's not about selling. It's not about the American people. It's about political will of our leadership. And our leadership, you know, I'm trying to be technical and Astronaut, not get too much into the politics side of it, but
You're doing great.
I'll leave it at that. And,
Well, that's super. Gentlemen, we are running out of time, and I'm going to have to bring this great forum to a close. I want to thank you for sharing your time and your insight with our audience tonight. I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us here at the Bernie Simpkins Auditorium on the Cocoa campus of Brevard Community College. I want to thank our audience at Florida.com for joining us live, and for those of you watching this on WBCC TV later. I must thank those who made this forum possible, including the Canaveral Council of Technical Societies, the Brevard Community College, and of course, Florida Today. I'm Matt Reed from Florida Today. Good luck to you in the months and years ahead.